So here's what we're doing. So I threw this to Chase, and this is a question we had from Twitter for the mailbag this week. What is each college? And this could be a pretty lengthy answer, but we're just going to go through team by team. So the question was from Wicked Brew. What is each college football playoff contending team's glaring weakness? Now, there may not be a glaring weakness for some of these teams, but the thing that maybe concerns you is where we'll go. So, Chase, I threw it to you. If you're narrowing down the list of teams, I think we need to do that first, which could be a long list, could be a short list.
All right, so I'll say Texas.
Okay.
They're a college football playoff contender. LSU, Georgia, Alabama. I'll put South Carolina in there. I think they could contend. And maybe Florida. I'll keep it at 6.
Okay.
Jay, and all those are not going to make the playoffs, but those are the ones I feel like can contend.
Add or subtract from that list?
I would add Ole Miss.
Right. Yeah.
Forgot about that. Yes.
And then I think if you're talking contenders, I think we have that next group. And it was, the more I thought about what we did yesterday with the power rankings, that group, that's the top 7 that were in our power rankings. And then, as you said, it was amazingly close, 8 through 11. Now, those questions for those teams, 8 through 11, if memory serves, were in whatever order, were Auburn, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and A&M. Their questions loom bigger, but there are pieces there that they could easily hop into the contention category. But I think 7 is where we should start if we're going to talk about contenders. I think all 7 of those teams will be preseason top 15 to 18. And that puts you in contention, at least when you start the season.
Okay,
yeah,
so
I agree with that.
I think that's the way to do it. All right, so we'll start with, let's say, we'll go from the bottom to the top. So of our rankings, South Carolina and Florida, as we said yesterday, were in a tie in terms of the votes. So if you had to start with maybe your potential, again, weakness may be too strong a word, but potential thing that holds you back or could hold them back from making the college football playoff, all that stuff with Florida and South Carolina.
For South Carolina, I would say it's got to be more than Lenora Sellers. They've got to have more playmakers than him, and if they don't, then that's an issue. It's got to be more than just him offensively. They've got to have reliable receivers. I feel like they didn't last year. And so that's something to me is just what kind of receivers do they have, and are they able to run the football?
I concur with that, but I think in my mind is how do you replace and who is going to step forward for the defensive dudes that they lost? Because every time you looked up, the Kennard kid was either strip sacking somebody, stopping somebody on 3rd and 1 to get them off the field. He was rightly the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. And I said this to Brian a couple of weeks ago. It feels like every year South Carolina has a guy in the front 7 who ends up going on to the league and being a boss. And so there's certainly talent on that side of the ball and in the defensive, in their defensive groups. But when you've got such a difference maker like he was last year, everybody could look to him and he delivered. There comes a sense of confidence that makes everybody else better. I don't know if you can replace that, but somebody's going to have to try.
What about Florida, Chase?
I think defensively, I think is something to watch for Florida. I know they've I don't have their depth chart in front of me, but I know they've got some guys there on defense. They lost some defensively. Because I think DJ Lagway's good, and I think he's gonna do his part for Florida. But what can they do defensively? I think is kind of what stands out to me about Florida. They've got to separate themselves defensively if they want to be a contender in the college football playoff. we've got to be able to see them do some things defensively. That's, I guess, what the thing I would look at.
And despite my inability to pronounce his name correctly yesterday, I also am a fan of Lagway. And Chase, I think you're spot on. That's a Florida defense last year. They gave up 23 plus points a game, which, I mean, that's tough sledding, even if the offense is humming. And they're kind of in a position that they fill the old Vandy joke. Some years Vandy would return 19 starters, but sadly they all started for Vandy. The Florida defense has 8 guys coming back, and they had some impacts in the portal. So the chances for a very noticeable improvement, but giving up more than 3 touchdowns, especially when you factor in a couple of games that should be shutouts, or the other team only gets 3 or 7 points in the non-conference, the defense has to be better.
Interesting stat here. So Phil Steele has Florida's defensive line ranked 10th and is in the top individual units heading into next season. He has their defensive backs ranked 10th in the country, and he has their linebackers at 25. So those 3 areas, I mean, again, if you're top 10 in 2 of those categories, you better be improved to be able to, again, like you said, maybe make that step towards the playoffs. So, all right, so if we go beyond those teams, and now we get to, I mean, let's do Alabama. Is it as simple as what we talked about yesterday? Is it just quarterback? Is that it? I mean,
I think so. I most definitely think so. That's the glaring weakness, as the question said to me. And what would keep them out of the playoffs is an inexperienced quarterback and him not playing to that level. Everywhere else I like on Alabama's roster.
I completely agree. And Chase, you're in that state. You hear it almost every day. I mean, it is – what do you think it would take, or how quickly do you think they would pull the trigger and go with the 5-star freshman?
And that's the thing I don't know, and nobody seems to know, because I've asked that to some insiders, and some seem to think that it wouldn't happen very quickly, that it would take a lot. And I don't think it needs to take a lot. I think it needs to be, if it needs to happen, it needs to happen. And I'm just not sure that it will in the timely manner that it may need to.
And to that point, and I have this up in front of me now, so I'll be able to access all of them. Alabama's favored to make the playoff. They're at minus 158, which means you got to bet $158 to win 100 to make the playoff.
Man, yeah, that's interesting. I think it is that simple. Like you said, I think it just comes down to quarterback and see how it plays out. Too, I mean, if you're looking at Alabama's schedule and where it ranks, I'm looking at some of these rankings for like toughest schedules too. And they're, I'd say, middle of the pack, maybe bottom half in terms of like their overall schedule right now. It's still top 20-ish, top 25 in the country because they play in the SEC. But compared to, let's say, a Florida, like we mentioned, I mean, Mississippi State, Arkansas, South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma, Kentucky. Yes, I mean, they are kind of further down there. If you look at, I've got Phil Steele's rankings, got a couple other rankings here in terms of toughest schedules. So maybe that helps a little bit, but doesn't help playing that early game, like you said, on the road for a very quarterback that needs to prove a little bit more probably. So we didn't touch on Ole Miss yet, did we? Sorry, I think I skipped them. Ole Miss.
I feel like they're one of those teams I don't know enough about yet. I know Austin Simmons is going to be good. Jay, you can hit on this one better. I'm still not completely versed on the Ole Miss Rebels yet. Just because there's so much turnover, I think.
Yes. I don't even know if Lane Kiffin's completely versed on them. And I've got a belief in the upside of Austin Simmons, who, man, oh man, does he look the part? I mean, he's from Central Casting, and um, in that regard. I mean, I don't want to turn every one of these into a quarterback situation, but in some ways, are they going to be able to repiece a defensive front that was really the anchor of their football team last year? So, I mean, good gravy. Didn't they lead the SEC in sacks? I mean, with like a big number. And so are they going to be able to replicate that is also probably chief among Lane Kiffin's priorities heading into getting ready for fall practice. And let's be clear. Chief on Lane Kiffin's priority list right now is figuring out who he's going to take shots at in Atlanta early next month. I mean, don't tell me he doesn't come in there with a checklist thinking, all right, Jeff Levy, I got you. I mean, he's got a couple of things calculated that he's just going to fire off.
Yeah, that takes more than a day. He's prepared for at least a week, I think, on that. So Ole Miss does, I think, pretty much by any metric you look at. And I mean, it's different saying it now versus 10 years ago, but like they have the least returning experience of any team in the SEC. But again, it's the transfer portal era. Doesn't mean the same it used to, but still, it's something to note on that. All right.
I promise to add this in. Ole Miss, you get plus money on yes to make the playoffs at plus 160. And I'll tell you one that jumped off the page at me that we've already talked about. South Carolina to make the college football playoff, plus 410. Bet 100, win $410.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, so just to quickly a detour on that. So if South Carolina, if you look at their schedule, which I do not have up, but I'll pull up now. I think we talked about their schedule not long ago, Chase, didn't we? Didn't we do the breakdown of their schedule?
I think so. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago.
So open against Virginia Tech, that's in Atlanta, right? Then they've got South Carolina State, Vanderbilt at home, at Missouri, home against Kentucky. So I think we said like that's a great opportunity to be 5-0 if you play your cards right, because those are all winnable games and probably games they're favored in, and all of them. At Missouri, I would think they're favored just based on where we had them, right? So then it gets interesting. Then it becomes look the hell out. At LSU, home against Oklahoma, home against Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, and they've got Clemson, of course, to end the season. So, like, man, you talk about a difference between the first half and back half of the schedule on paper. Pretty brutal, it looks like. So.
That middle stretch is tough. It's tough. And I'm, I think they'll win some games in there, but it's you got to be ready. You got to come to play those games because that's tough.
I think one of the great things about the schedule, though, with the expanded number, and when it expands, and I said when, not if, when it expands to 16, you now get mulligans. I mean, with that schedule and the names you rattled off, especially going out of conference with a Virginia Tech and a Clemson, 9-3 likely gets them in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, their home games, like we said, I mean, they we know what happened in the Alabama game last year. They were close, and they get Alabama at home this year. It really is probably coming down to those, like, swing games on the road with an Ole Miss and an A&M. And, I mean, again, they're at LSU, they're at Missouri too, but like those are probably the games that sort of define your season, especially if you can knock off Alabama at home. So, yep, and Clemson, of course. I mean, they're preseason top 5. So, yeah, so we'll see on the Gamecocks. All right, moving up to LSU.
I think for LSU, to me, depth on defense. They've gone out. They've got the guys, but I'm not sure how many depth pieces they have. And that's one of the problems they ran into last year is all those injuries defensively that I feel like put them behind a little bit. So I think that would be something that stands out to me is what does their depth look like defensively and how they can manage that if needed. Because, again, the players are there, but what's it look like behind those money guys that they got?
I think this one is the old adage of you've got the quarterback, you've got a great sophomore running back. LSU wide receivers are always going to be complete playmakers. But who are the big heavy bodies up front? They lost 4 offensive linemen. I think all of them were drafted. I know the 2 tackles were highly coveted last April. They hit the portal hard. I think Tyree Adams, a transfer kid, is going to help them greatly. But I think they've got in depth. I've spent my life working newspapers before I pulled up a chair with you guys. And I used to always, whatever sport, when you were doing a preview story, when you asked a coach about his team's biggest concern, the telltale sign that they're going to be good is if his first concern is finding depth, because that tells me he thinks his first line dudes are ready. So we're just working, because if you can only come up with finding depth, you're loaded. But the offensive line getting to a place, because unlike a lot of the other quarterbacks in this league, Nussmeier's not going to avoid pressure and make an athletic play like a Lagway can, or a Lenore Sellers can, or some of these other cats. But if they can blend an offensive line before Columbus Day, this is a playoff team. Let me get their odds from FanDuel real quick. Odds to make the playoff. LSU, you get plus money, plus 138.
Surprised,
which is a little surprising to me. Yeah.
I thought they would not be in that scenario. Interesting. All right, Georgia. I mean, again, we talk about the quarterback, the simple answers, but like they don't have a lot of weaknesses elsewhere.
Well,
no. What do you think, Jay?
Well, I just was going to hit the hammer on this. This is the biggest one I've seen so far. Georgia to make the playoff, minus 280.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, I get it. Like, again, I think you look at it just from a scheduling perspective. We don't call any schedule easy, but I think they have one of the more favorable schedules in the SEC. Even if you have your questions with Gunnar Stockton, they still have one of the more favorable schedules.
They do, yeah. And I think he would.
Go ahead, Chase. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just think Gunnar Stockton is what I'm curious to see, because again, he's got to step up at the big moments. He had some practice with that this past year, but that's who I think it all hangs on there with Georgia.
To that end, though, and some of the folks in the chat that we had yesterday in the comments section, it got me thinking, didn't Gunnar Stockton play better in the moments he got than Arch Manning did?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
I think so.
We know the name on the back. We know his uncles. We know his granddaddy. Because I wrote a column this morning on timesfreepress.com kind of centered on the question, is Arch Manning an All-American kid, or is he an All-American QB1? And he can be both. If you took everybody's name off of the returning stats at quarterback, where does he fall compared to with his name on it?
Yeah, it's a fair point. Absolutely.
It is, yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's probably your answer for Texas, right? I mean, is there anything beyond that, Chase, you would look at? I mean, or again,
I don't think so.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
So
that's the school I want to see a payroll. I want NIL to figure out a way that it can be for you, because that's the one. I mean, you're playing $2.1 million for a backup tackle. I mean, there's some oil money being cashed out in Austin now.